Brazil's President Lula da Silva just sent a message loud and clear, and not just to President Trump, but to Washington itself. President Lula says, "We will talk, but only as equals." And that appears to be a message that Trump hears more and more from global leaders as he defaults to his bullying tactics. The world is not taking that anymore.
Mas, obviamente, que eu não vou deixar de compreender a importância da relação diplomática com os Estados Unidos, que já dura 201 anos. Eu não vou esquecer que eles também já deram o golpe aqui, ajudaram a dar o golpe. Mas o que eu quero saber é daqui para frente o que é que eu faço. E daqui para frente eles têm que saber que nós temos o que negociar. Nós temos tamanho, nós temos postura, nós temos interesses econômicos e interesses políticos para negociar. Eu não vou abrir mão de achar que a gente precisa procurar construir uma moeda alternativa para que a gente possa negociar com os outros países. Eu não preciso ficar subordinado ao dólar.
And Brazil's response is more than just posturing. This is a turning point in how Latin America's largest economy deals with the United States. But first, let's rewind to make sure that we're on the same page, because this is very important. So last month in July, right after the BRICS Plus summit in Rio de Janeiro, Trump suddenly dragged Brazil into his global trade war. He threatened to slap 50% tariffs on Brazilian goods unless Brazil's Supreme Court dropped charges against former President Bolsonaro, who is accused of attempting a coup d'etat in Brazil. And you know what? You heard that right. The United States sitting president tried to strong-arm Brazil's judiciary over a domestic criminal case in exchange for trade leniency. Yes, it happened. So the charges are also very important. Bolsonaro is facing trial for allegedly trying to stage a coup d'etat after losing the 2022 elections. The judge overseeing that case, Justice Alexandre de Moraes, has been sanctioned by the Trump administration. That's right, a sitting Brazilian Supreme Court justice is now under U.S. sanctions. Why? Because he's prosecuting what many would call a far-right leader accused of subverting democracy. And yet Trump, after publicly interfering in Brazil's domestic affairs, says that Lula can just call him, as if the problem is just a phone call away from being solved. What is Lula's answer? The president of Brazil said, "We're open to negotiations, but only on equal terms. We will defend our workers, we will protect our companies, and if the United States wants to talk, you know what, our proposals are already on the table." In other words, this is not a one-way street, says Lula. Brazil is no longer playing the role of a junior partner in U.S. foreign policy. Those days are gone. Deal with it, President Trump. Now, let's be clear, Lula is not closing the door on diplomacy. In fact, his finance minister, Fernando Haddad, has welcomed Trump's latest remarks, and he plans to meet with the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent soon to discuss the tariffs and sanctions. So the dialogue is happening. It is a good thing, but it is happening not at any cost. And that is a very important point to understand. And this matters because for decades, U.S.-Brazil relations have been defined by imbalance. Washington gave the orders and Brazil joyfully obliged or paid the price. But Lula is now challenging that legacy. He's drawing a line between diplomacy and coercion, between mutual respect and outright blackmail. As I mentioned previously, bullying backfires, and we see that already. And he's not backing down. He said plainly, it is unacceptable to try to use a political issue to impose economic sanctions on us. And he's 100% right. Think about what's at stake here. A U.S. president trying to influence a foreign judiciary through trade threats sets a very, very dangerous precedent, you would agree, not just for Brazil, but for democratic systems everywhere. This isn't just about tariffs, it is about power and how it is used. Now, there's another layer here BRICS. As someone who has been covering BRICS extensively for years now, I can't help but mention that Trump was very much triggered by the success of the BRICS bloc and the fact that the emerging economies are open to relations with the West, but they're not willing to play a second fiddle anymore. And they have more and more appealing alternatives. So Trump doesn't like that. And so Lula has been pushing very hard for an alternative to the US dollar in foreign trade, something that's drawn heavy criticism from Washington. And while BRICS hasn't made major progress on a common currency, and it hasn't really had a plan to do so because it just isn't the right time for that, the idea itself, which is to reduce the reliance on the dollar, clearly drives Trump up the wall. Why? Well, because the dollar and its dominance is one of the pillars of American global influence. Undermining that, even symbolically, is viewed as a threat to the US power. But Lula isn't backing away. He's made it very clear Brazil today is not a dependent on the United States as it once was. And that is completely true. Brazil is a major food and energy exporter. It has deep ties with China, growing ties with the EU, and it plays a key role in regional leadership. It has leverage, and Lula is ready to use it. Of course, none of this is happening in a vacuum. As Lula asserts Brazil's independence, tensions are rising at home. Bolsonaro supporters are back on the streets, which is quite an interesting coincidence. They're marching in major cities like Rio de Janeiro and Brasilia, accusing the Supreme Court and Lula's government of persecuting their leader. This domestic pressure only raises the stakes of the international game. Trump's threats wasn't just a trade move, it was a signal of solidarity, of Washington's solidarity with Bolsonaro's base. And this move blurs the line between foreign policy and pure politics. But here's the thing, Lula isn't folding, he's playing a longer game. Whether it is in trade, in finance, or geopolitics, he's demanding a seat at the table, not as a guest, not anymore, but as a partner. And that matters. It matters for Brazil, it matters for Latin America, and for every global South nation watching this moment unfold. Because if the United States can use tariffs to interfere in Brazil's justice system today, where does it stop? Where does it lead us? This is the model that Trump is pushing, of course, a world where trade isn't about mutual benefit, but about compliance. And Lula's response is, you know what, that's enough. He's not anti-American, of course, he's not anti-trade, but he's absolutely against being dictated to. And that distinction is very important. It's about legitimacy, and it's also about creating a new diplomatic playbook where emerging economies don't get punished for pursuing independent paths, as frankly they should, of course. So here's where we stand. Trump is testing the limits of economic coercion. Lula is drawing the line. The rest of the world is watching very, very closely. Will the United States continue to wield its power through threats, bullying, and sanctions, or will it finally learn how to negotiate, not as a superpower anymore, but as a peer? That choice will define not just U.S.-Brazil relations, but the future of global diplomacy in a multipolar world. Because if Lula's bets pay off, he won't just be defending Brazil's autonomy and sovereignty. He will be helping to redraw the rules of engagement for an entire generation of nations no longer content to sit quietly at the edge of the table. Thank you very much for watching today. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on this subject. I would love to hear from you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.